Hi and welcome to my wee channel, The Wandering Kilt. Can I take this opportunity to say hello to anybody watching from Belgium? Today's video features both old and new, the old being the capital of Scotland between the 11th and 15th centuries, the new being city status conferred by Queen Elizabeth II in 2022. Where am I? Dunfermline in Fife, of course. Dunfermline is old, very old, dating back to the Neolithic or Stone Age period. The city was first mentioned in the 11th century when Queen Margaret, who was Malcolm III of Scotland's wife, established a church here, which later became Dunfermline Abbey. The primary use was as a royal mausoleum or crypt for the Scottish crown, and it became the resting place of 18 royals, 7 of which were kings of Scotland from 1093 up until 1420. The most famous, of course, being Scotland's hero and the hammer of the English, King Robert the Bruce, laid to rest here in 1329. King Malcolm III was married in Dunfermline around 1068 and set about making Dunfermline the de facto capital of Scotland. The church evolved into an abbey in 1128. With that came immense power, but not for the crown, but for the church. They had control over 3 courts, 4 boroughs, and an impressive amount of land, stretching from Berwickshire up to Moray. From 1127, the palace was connected to the abbey. Now, if you wonder how long the Auld Alliance has lasted between Scotland and France, well, the first known document was signed here on 23rd of October 1295, so it's a fair few years ago. Although James VI's second oldest son, who was born in Dunfermline on the 19th of November 1600, would be the last monarch to be born in Scotland. Charles I became King of Scotland, England and Ireland on the 27th of March 1625. And within a short space of time he managed to upset the majority of his subjects, which was no mean feat. He believed in the divine right to rule, meaning his word was law, end of. Taxes without consent, his high-handed approach to the Church of Scotland. In the end, almost everyone was against him, the English parliamentaries and Scottish armies, leading to the English Civil War. He was captured, tried, convicted and later lost his head on the 30th of January 1649, aged only 48, being decapitated. A fire broke out on the 25th of May 1624 in Dunfermline, destroying at least half of the medieval buildings here, which is a bit of a shame. The seat of power had shifted by the start of the 18th century away from Dunfermline towards Edinburgh. And Dunfermline became a centre for weaving, more importantly linen. The mills needed a ready supply of water to power the mill wheels and process the linen. Ships could unload their cargo in the numerous nearby harbours, travelling from the Netherlands and as far away as the Baltic states. Spying. No, not the Cold War kind of thing, but I guess nowadays called industrial espionage. Not exactly cloak and dagger James Bond stuff. But in 1709, James Blake gave the appearance of an idiot to gain entry to a damask linen factory in Edinburgh. While he was there, he memorised the process and later on started his own factory. Now, from what I've read, the process involves reversing the action of the warp and weft threads, which just mean a lot to me. But suffice it to say, when it's done, it has a reversible pattern. So what remains today? Well, much of the monastery was destroyed by Edward Longshank's troops in 1303. The Abbey Parish Church was built onto the bits that were left between 1818 and 1821. This is the place to go if you want to see King Robert the Bruce's tomb. He was interred here at the altar in 1329, but his heart was removed, taken on a crusade, and is in Melrose Abbey. Queensferry is linked with Dunfermline as well, because Queen Margaret, remember we talked about her earlier on, she organised a free ferry crossing for the pilgrims in the 11th century, hence why it's called Queensferry. I'm sure you can't talk about Dunfermline without mentioning the philanthropist Andrew Carnegie, who was born in 1835. He came from poverty to become one of the richest men in the world, but he didn't forget his roots, installing free libraries and swimming baths in the city, and donating the vast Pittencrieff estate in 1903. There was hardly a Scottish town that didn't benefit from his wealth. Any other famous folk from here? Well, Jethro Tull lead singer Ian Anderson, Stuart Adamson of the Skids and latterly Big Country, Dan McCafferty, whose raucous voice stood out from the rock band Nazareth. Football. Is there a local team? Of course there is. Dunfermline Athletic, formed in 1885. They were a force in Scottish football in the 1960s, winning the Scottish Cup in 1961 and 1968, reaching the semi-finals of the 1968-1969 European Cup Winners' Cup. Not bad from a team that started out as a football section of a cricket club that was formed to help the players keep fit during the winter when there was no cricket. While they've had few successes in recent years, East End Park could still pull off a few surprises. Is Dunfermline worth a visit? Well, there are plenty of shops and cafes, a Greggs and even a Baines. But for history lovers, it's a place not to be missed, especially if you're Scottish. But be warned, the spiral steps from the gatehouse to the Abbey are incredibly narrow. In fact, I felt quite claustrophobic. I had to take off my rucksack, and it was nip and tuck whether I actually got down or not. It drops about 30 feet, but it was kind of tight for me. I'm not the thinnest of guys, but it's certainly well worth it. The only staircase I've had worse than that is the one in Inchcolm Abbey, which gets you to the roof. I had to breathe in to get through that one. Okay, I think I've said quite enough, but before I go, can you help by subscribing to the channel? It's free, but it helps me to keep filming. And feel free to comment, and if there's a place I haven't filmed that you would like me to do, drop me a line. Anyway, let's get on with it. Well, that was Dunfermline. The surprising thing is the amount of history there that people don't actually visit it. I mean, people will head up to Stirling or they go to Edinburgh, which obviously they're both got stacks of history as well. But everybody kind of forgets how important Dunfermline was in the history of Scotland. As I say, it's got plenty of things going for it. There's always lots of things to see, and if you get fed up with the history side, there's plenty of shops and cafes. Anyway, as I look at the big clock on the wall, I see that once again, time has beaten us. So until the next time, bye for now.